Hi guys, welcome back to Human Biology. So let's discuss the lymphatic system and the immune systems. And my goal is to take this lecture and break it up into two parts. What you'll find is the vast majority of it deals with the lymphatic and immune systems. And then the second half is the respiratory system. We will save the respiratory system for another separate video. Alright, now lymphatic and immune. What you see here, shown here in green, is the lymphatic system. Okay, this is the lymphatic system. And what you're going to find is the lymphatic system and the immune system work very closely with one another, and sort of the immune system piggybacks off the lymphatic system in order to gain some degree of function. The lymphatic system. Okay, so the three main functions of the lymphatic system are as follows. These are fluid recovery, immunity, and lipid absorption. And we sort of talked about this in a previous lecture. In terms of fluid recovery, every time your heart beats, you basically have what you could think of as almost like a tidal system in the ocean. So when waves come in, the waves hit the beach, and then water goes up the beach, and then the water comes back out into the ocean. And then the wave hits, and water goes up the beach, and then water comes back out, or back down into the ocean. Every time your heart beats, there's a pulse wave that enters into your capillary beds. And when this pulse wave of blood pressure hits the capillaries, it pushes fluid against those capillary beds, which basically pushes fluid out of the capillaries into the extraneous tissues of the body. This is where nutrients and waste and oxygen, carbon dioxide, all that stuff exchanges. And when the pressure wave of ventricular contraction of systole goes away, the pressure ceases, and the fluid that was out in that extraneous tissue makes its way back into the capillaries. So the heart beats, systolic pressure pushes the fluid out. Diastolic pressure, the ventricles relax, the fluid makes its way back into the capillaries. So fluid goes out of the capillaries, fluid comes into the capillaries. Fluid goes out of the capillaries, fluid comes into the capillaries. With the pulsing of the heart. Now, about 85% of the fluid that's pulsed out of the capillaries makes its way back into the capillaries. But what about the missing 15%? What about that missing 15%? If you lost that fluid from the body somehow, that would be many liters a day of fluid. In other words, you would die very quickly. This extra 15%, the remaining fluid from the capillaries, gets picked up by the lymphatic system and then delivered back to the cardiovascular system. Alright? It is picked up. Once it enters the lymphatic system, it's called lymph. It makes its way through the lymphatic system, and it goes back to the heart almost directly. Okay? Now, part 2, immunity. The lymphatic system is just closely tied to the immune system. That's sort of how this works. The excess fluid picked up by the lymphatic system as it's moving back towards the heart, it gets filtered and tested for anything foreign or anything that's not supposed to be there. So your immune system tests the lymphatic fluid as it's moving back towards the heart to make sure that there's nothing there that shouldn't be there. It's almost like the line of people going into an airport. Like a small subset of individuals have to go through an extra bit of testing just to make sure, they randomly select to see if there's somebody doing something they're not supposed to do. That's what's happening with this fluid. A little bit of the fluid from the body passes through the lymphatic system, and as it goes through the lymphatic system, the immunity side of the body tests it to make sure there's nothing there that's not supposed to be there. Normally that happens at your lymph nodes. Okay, your lymph nodes. And then last but not least is lipid absorption. So the idea is that inside of your intestines, your small intestines, the later end of your small intestines, you have these structures that are called lacteals. Okay, they're called lacteals. And what these lacteals do is they pick up fat from your diet. So if you eat a hamburger, the fat from that hamburger gets absorbed into the body by the lymphatic system. Fat being a lipid, it's hard for the body to absorb this. So we have these lacteals that are specialized. They are set up in a special way to be able to absorb fats from your intestine. And the fluid that moves through these is referred to, or let me rephrase. The fluid that moves through these is basically a solubilized fat product, which gives it a milky white appearance, which is why we call these lacteals. Initially, we thought it had something to do with milk because the fluid looks like milk. In fact, if you look at your lymphatic fluid, after you've had a steak dinner or something like that, something with a lot of fat, your lymphatic fluids will be quite cloudy because of all of the fat running through the lymphatic system. Alright, let's go here. So lymphatic cells, of which there are several. So reticular cells make what are called reticular fibers. In essence, your lymph nodes are a big net system. Okay, if you look inside of a lymph node, it looks like a big net of fibers. So any fluid passing through the lymph node gets caught in the fibers of reticular cells. All right, reticular cells make reticular fibers, and it looks something like this. So that as fluid passes through this net, any like bacteria, for example, that are in the fluid, they will get trapped in the net like a spider's web. Okay. There are macrophages that are like big white blood cells that attack and destroy foreign pathogens. Lymphocytes of various forms that attack and destroy pathogens. All of these are coming from bone marrow, by the way. Like natural killer cells, great name for killing off bacteria and infected host cells. T lymphocytes directly attack inflamed host cells. B lymphocytes. Zoom. B lymphocytes that are able to produce antibodies that can mark cells for death. It's a genius concept. And then dendritic cells, again, that are used in the activation of T lymphocytes. It's kind of a long story, but these are dendritic cells. And what you see here is they're reaching out and grabbing a hold of bacteria and dragging them back to themselves. All right, now then, organs of the lymphatic system. There are primary organs and there are secondary organs. The primary organs of the lymphatic system include the red bone marrow and the thymus gland. Thymus gland way up here. Okay, I'm sorry, what am I talking about? Right there, okay? So red bone marrow is obviously an organ of the lymphatic system because red bone marrow makes all of the white blood cells of the body. Okay, so all those T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes and all that fun stuff, they are made by the bone marrow. So that's obviously very important. And then the thymus gland. Now the thymus gland in you is probably pretty small, but in a newborn baby it's massive. What the thymus gland is a special barracks, if you will, for T lymphocytes. So when the T lymphocytes are made in the bone marrow, they leave from there and they go immediately to the thymus gland to mature. And the thymus gland houses them and tests them so they can't escape and lead to damage in the body. So basically, we should wait on this as a concept, and we'll talk more about it in a second. This is complicated, and we'll talk about it in a little while. The idea is that as you age, T cells leave the thymus over time and go out into the body to do their job, whereas in babies, all the T lymphocytes are in the thymus gland, so the thymus gland is quite large. Yeah, okay. And then there are secondary organs, like your lymph nodes. So you have lymph nodes, massive quantities of them all over the body. This image here shows you some locations of the lymph nodes. You primarily think about them as being like in the neck and under the arms and around the groin, anywhere where there are limbs coming into the body. And what these lymph nodes do is they form a housing for white blood cells to hang out in. So what you'll have is a net of reticular fiber. And if a bacterium comes through and gets caught in the net, you have all these white blood cells hanging out in that lymph node. They're going to cruise through and find it, and they're like spiders in the web. They're going to chow down. And then what they do is, if they find a foreign body, they will call for help. They will send out chemical signals, and more white blood cells will come and accrue in that lymph node to protect you. And when more white blood cells come and pile into that lymph node, the lymph node swells. And that swelling, that swollen lymph node, is a good way to know that you have some sort of infection. Alright, the spleen's involved in this as well. So the spleen is kind of on your left-hand side, below your ribcage a little bit. It's a weird thing, too. It's got a texture almost like a tongue, alright, if you can imagine feeling your tongue. It's a very tough organ internally, so this organ is constantly being damaged and repaired, like it can repair itself. Like you can have very little to no spleen left, and it can regrow completely. And it's basically used to clean or cleanse the blood in some ways, okay? Now, there are other lymphatic tissues as well. Your tonsils are lymphatic tissues. Think about these as an early warning system. So if you're consuming something that's pathogenic, your body can identify that quite early using the tonsils and warn the rest of the immune system. The Krypton, yeah, not so much. Let's talk about Peyer's patches. And then you also have Peyer's patches. Peyer's patches line the intestinal tract in some parts. So think about the intestinal tract as being the area for absorption into the body. What we have to do is we have to constantly monitor anything coming in, being absorbed by the intestines, to make sure there's nothing pathogenic or potentially dangerous inside of there. And that's done by these structures called Peyer's patches, and you can see that here. That's sort of what Peyer's patches look like. Okay, that's perfect. Components of the lymphatic system. You can see that all outlined here. So what we have is all of these lymph nodes just all over the place, and then we have these thoracic ducts and lymphatic ducts that kind of drain back towards the heart. That's the idea. So we're slowly draining back towards the heart. Brings fluid back to the cardiovascular system. It is a barracks for immune cells. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, folks. Alright, I will talk a little bit about this. So your lymphatic capillaries and lacteals. So this is a villus in your intestinal tract, and you can see the lacteal there. Inside of this would be used for the uptake of fat. Lymphatic capillaries, highly permeable. Okay, so the lymphatic capillaries, what they do is, here's a capillary bed, like a blood capillary bed, and as the blood pulses and pulses and pulses, the fluid pressure of that fluid leaving the blood capillaries pushes open little mini valves inside of your lymphatic capillaries that are just interspersed everywhere here. So the pressure will push against this mini valve, open up the lacteal, wrong term. Open up the lymphatic capillary, and fluid goes into the lymphatic capillary, but then when the pressure comes off, the mini valve closes, and the fluid in the lymphatic system can no longer escape. It has to go through the lymphatic system all the way back to the heart. This is how we can guarantee that that fluid gets tested by your immune system to make sure that there's nothing there that's not supposed to be there. Alright, yeah, that's perfect. So the capillary beds pulse. That pulsation of fluid puts pressure on your lymphatic capillaries. They take up a little bit of excess fluid, and that fluid gets slowly pushed back towards the heart, where it has to go through a lymph node to be tested by your immune system. Yes, that right there will work, folks. That'll work. Now, we can increase the rate of this, and one of the ways that we do that is by releasing a product called histamine. Okay, histamine. You probably realize that histamine makes your eyes water, or if you get pricked by something like a thorn or even like a mosquito bite or something like that, your body will locally release histamine and it'll make a little swollen spot. What's happening there is the blood capillaries are venting excess fluid to increase the amount of flow through these mini valves in your lymphatic capillaries, so that if anything came in that was dangerous, your immune system can immediately respond. So we're really a fascinating system. Let's see, lymphatic capillaries, lymphatic collecting vessels, lymph nodes. This sort of runs just like the rest of the cardiovascular system. The idea is that you've got the smallest carriers to bigger ones, to bigger ones, to bigger ones, to bigger ones, and then back into the cardiovascular system. Yeah, so it's pressure driven. Every time the heart beats, we're pressing some of this fluid back into the lymphatic system. Right. Lymph nodes. So, lymph nodes are a rest stop for lymph as it is flowing back towards the cardiovascular system. So, when fluid is picked up by the blood capillaries, or by the lymphatic capillaries from the blood capillaries, it slowly makes its way through lymph nodes on its way back to the cardiovascular system. And they have a simple purpose, and that is filtration. Like interiorly, they're basically a big net, a web of reticular fibers that white blood cells hang out in, waiting for any kind of pathogen to make its way through so they can attack and destroy that pathogen, and then call for further help activating the immune system when antigens, foreign particles, are detected that are potentially dangerous. I mean, your lymph nodes are just packed with B cells, surrounded by dendritic cells, and T cells are constantly coming and going. These are just full of white blood cells, is what I'm trying to tell you. So as materials come in, and these are valved, okay, these have valves, fluid comes in, it can't escape, it has to go through the lymph node, and if there's anything there that's not supposed to be there, it's eradicated. And you can see here in this tissue in the intestines, so this is a tissue that helps hold the intestines together. All these little dots, these are all lymph nodes. Okay, those are all lymph nodes. And that takes us to the immune system. Now, the immune system is broken down into two basic parts. This is non-specific, or what I call innate immunity, and then specific, or what we call adaptive immunity. First comment, how do microbes and humans interact? And the answer there is we interact all the time, every single day, constantly. All right, constantly. Microbes are very abundant in the environment and just all over our bodies. In our bodies, you have more microbial cells in your intestine than you have human cells in your whole body. They're just very small, all right? We use microbes every day to do a variety of things. If you like good cheese that's nice and soft and delicious, like a brie or a camembert, man, let me tell you, that's done by microbes. If you know someone or you require insulin, insulin is manufactured using microbes as an intermediary, so we engineer them to make things that we need. We make a lot of drugs like that, actually. Microbes are used for breakdown of things in the world around us. So if you go to the water treatment plant in Tuscaloosa County, they're treating that water in no small part by using microbes to pull nutrients out of the water. And it works. It works. Good beer. Good beer is made using microbes. The alcohol there is from a fermentation process. It's done by microbes. So are all microbes bad? The answer there is no. There are lots of good ones, but there are bad ones. And those bad ones are called pathogens. Okay? Pathogens. Now let me just point something out to you real quick. This is a good old-fashioned animal cell. This is a representation of a decently sized bacteria. In fact, that's a pretty big bacteria. Normally, a virus will be like a tiny little dot. The tiniest little dot imaginable next to a bacterium. So they are very small. This image here of a virus would be a massive virus compared to an animal cell. Probably like a plant virus. Plant viruses are much larger. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about bacteria. I would invite you to check this out. It's pretty cool. I don't have the time at the moment. But bacteria are single-celled prokaryotic organisms. Now, what the heck does that mean? That means they have a single cell. They're not multicellular. They don't have more than one. Just one cell, and they are prokaryotic. Prokarya means they do not have a nucleus. Inside of a bacterial cell, all they have is what's called a nucleoid region. It's like a big area where there's a bunch of chromosomal material. Bacteria just have one big ring-like chromosome, and it's all kind of balled up and stuck in a corner of a cell. They don't have a nucleus. They're prokaryotic, right? Sometimes it can have little accessory rings of DNA called plasmids, and you can see one there. But that's neither here nor there. It's sort of a long story. And further, bacteria tend to reproduce via asexual means, which is what's called binary fission. When bacteria reproduce themselves, they just kind of split down the middle and become more than one cell. In fact, if you look down here, you can see some cells that are kind of breaking into two pieces. Those cells are dividing via binary fission. Now, one of the problems with bacteria is that they're capable of producing really powerful toxins, like tetanus and Clostridium botulinum. Strep can do this. All of these are capable of producing toxins which hurt the body. So, like Clostridium botulinum doesn't really do much to you, but it produces a toxin which is incredibly potent. So when you stress out, my kiddos are freaking out there. So when you stress out these bacteria, they start to vent toxins, and that toxin causes mass damage. Right? It can be quite damaging. Let's see. Bacteria come in a variety of shapes and sizes. That's all facts. I'm not going to talk about antibiotic resistance right now. I don't think I am. Yeah, let's not worry about that at this particular time. Let's go to here. So what are viruses? Boy, pertinent to our current situation. Viruses are incredibly small, non-living, obligate parasites. Now, what does that mean? Viruses are non-cellular. This is not a cell. What a virus is, in most cases, is a protein coat around a piece of RNA or potentially a piece of DNA. And what will happen is, let me see if I've got more slides on this. I don't. What will happen is this protein coat comes down, and it finds a cell, and it attaches to that outside of the cell, forces the cell open, and injects a piece of RNA. That piece of RNA will find the rough endoplasmic reticulum and attach to a ribosome, and it'll start cranking out copies of itself. It takes over the host cell's machinery. What a virus does is it takes over the host cell's machinery and convinces the host cell's machinery to make more virus, which then can leave the cell and infect other cells. It's a really scary thing. Acellular, thus non-living. They have a capsid, which is that outer protein coat. They can have RNA or DNA inside. Oh, viruses tend to be incredibly specific as to what kind of cells they can attach to, because their outer protein coat has to be able to convince the host cell to open up. Cold, flu, measles, chickenpox, polio, rabies, AIDS, all of this. It's all viral in its nature, so it reacts in the same fashion. That's one of the things they're talking about with this COVID-19 right now, is that it probably was in bats, and for whatever reason, you know, bats share a lot of similar genetics to us, so they are mammals, and one of these bats had a virus that had mutated slightly in a fashion that allowed it to then infect humans, and now all these people are getting sick, and lots of folks are having major problems as a result of this virus that had jumped from one population into a wholly different species. When that happens, there tends to be incredibly high virulence and danger because we have no defenses against it whatsoever. Alright, let's move on. Now then, your immune system comes in 3 basic formats, alright? The first and second lines of defense are what we call the innate defenses. They are non-specific. When we say non-specific, let's see, boy, there is so much to say here, folks. Non-specific means they attack everything equally. They will go after whatever's causing you problems immediately and with no real precision, for lack of better terminology. The idea is if you get an infection with a bacteria, you have certain phagocytic cells that will just attack and start devouring those the moment that happens. Fever. Fever is broad spectrum. It doesn't matter how you're sick. If you're sick and you're having a fever, that fever is going to be helping you. Your surface barriers, your skin, is a wonderful means of keeping yourself from being sick. It is a wonderful tool of the immune system. Your skin keeps all kinds of bad stuff out. Don't believe me? Get a cut. The likelihood of getting an infection is vastly increased when your skin, when your surface barrier is damaged. Okay, is damaged. So those are non-specific. Non-specific. These innate defenses, non-specific defenses, I should say, they will attack everything equally. It doesn't matter what it is that's making you sick, a virus, bacteria, it don't matter. Parasitic worms, bloodborne pathogens, like malaria is a example of these attack everything equally. Everything equally. The third line of defense is what we call specific immunity. Specific immunity has to be educated on what's hurting you first, so it takes it a while to get started. So you get an infection, these help you first, while this is learning the story. And once this has learned the story, this is very specific. This specific immunity will only attack very specific pathogens, but they are quite potent. They just mop the floor with them when they're functional. And they have memory. So if you're ever affected by that same pathogen again, well, guess what? This system will keep you from ever getting sick. Now, what does this sound like? Think about getting a vaccination. What we're doing with a vaccination is we're exposing you to parts of a pathogen so that your specific immune system can learn those parts of the pathogen. And if you're ever exposed to it in reality, your specific immunity will destroy that pathogen prior to it ever having an effect. So, for instance, most of you have probably come into contact with measles or rubella or something like that in the world around you, but you've never been sick with measles or rubella because you were vaccinated against it as a child. So you have specific immunity against those terrible diseases. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this mechanism. So you have cutaneous membranes like the skin, and you have mucous membranes like with the lining of your nose and your intestinal tract and all that fun stuff. These are surface barriers. And these surface barriers are incredibly good at keeping bad stuff out. Your skin is really tough, alright? It's hard to get through there. These are keratinized dead cells. Things just don't burrow through the skin easily. They're very, very good at preventing this, in fact. Your mucous membranes are covered in a mucosal lining that collects and stops materials from being able to get into your body well. And they have hairs and cilia that push those invaders back out if they ever get in. These surface barriers are great at keeping stuff away. And the secretions of the skin and the mucous membranes are really good at keeping stuff out as well. So your skin is acidic. It's got what's called an acid mantle that prevents bacteria from being able to set up shop in most cases. So they can't deal with the acidity. Fungi really don't handle the acidity. So your chance of getting a skin fungal infection is greatly decreased. You produce an enzyme system called lysozyme in your saliva that keeps your mouth from having an overrun of bacterial growth. This stuff is good at keeping bad things out. All right, your natural flora even. So you have natural skin bacteria as an example, natural oral bacteria that live there. And these are very easygoing. They don't tend to be pathogenic. They will take up all the extra nutrients in the area and not hurt you, so that pathogens have nothing to consume, so they can't even set up shop. So I think about it like an apartment building. If all the rooms are full of the good stuff already, then no bad things can move in. All right, so that is a surface barrier system. Innate defense is the first line of defense. The second line of defense are internal defenses. So when your surface areas are breached, you have to have other cells that can come in and do the job. Now, these are still non-specific. They will attack everything equally, like your big phagocytic cells are good at going in and attacking anything that's hurting you. Any bacterial infection or what have you, they'll go through and mop the floor with them. All of your leukocytes, like neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, all of these will go in, it doesn't matter what's attacking you, and they will defend you. The problem with this is they're not very good at it. All right? You're going to get sick, and you're going to be sick for a little while. You'll get better because they're eventually going to do the job, but you're going to be sick for a little bit. You just got to suck it up and realize that that's the case. That is your internal defenses, non-specific. They work hard for you, but they're just not fast. All right, you're going to be sick for a little bit of time. And this is an example of sort of how this works. It's a long story. These are natural killer cells describing how they destroy a foreign pathogen. What they do is they release these protein networks called perforins, and these perforins poke holes in dangerous cells, and that basically leads to their destruction. They release chemicals that digest them internally. It's almost, again, like a spider. Okay, they will attach, digest the internal surface of that enemy cell, and then absorb it into their own system. They can then take antigens, outer markers of the foreign cell, and show them to other white blood cells and say, hey, here are the antigens of something that just tried to hurt us. We need to monitor this and make sure that it can't do anything further. Let's see here. Boy, there's a lot left. All right, innate defenses, fever. So the idea is that a mild fever actually helps your immune system to work better. So if you've got a fever of 100, 101, this actually increases the mobility of your white blood cells, makes your white blood cells better at absorbing foreign bodies, and prevents or decreases the effects of toxins released by certain bacteria. So a mild fever is a form of innate defense. It attacks everything equally. It actually helps you to stay healthier if you have a mild fever. In fact, it's pretty easily documented that when people have a mild fever, they are less infective and recover more quickly from diseases than people who take what are called antipyretics, like Tylenol and all that fun stuff. Now, that being said, if your kid's sick and your kid's got a fever and feels terrible, you do you, man. You do you. I'm just saying, mild fever is not the worst thing on the planet. Now, inflammation. So inflammation is kind of the same concept as a fever, but it's localized. Think of inflammation as a local fever. What will happen is if you have some sort of infection, and this is the worst looking toe I've ever seen, if you have some sort of infection, your body will send in all this blood flow to it and basically lock the area away, and it'll feel hot, it'll be painful, a lot of swelling, and oftentimes you'll develop pus inside of there. Pus is basically the remains of dead bacteria and dead white blood cells that are attacking them. Pus is like the bodies on a battlefield when the battle's going on. The general idea of inflammation, again, is to limit the spread of that pathogen. It keeps everything localized. You can see that all this down here is totally fine, but upstream it's all a problem. All right, so inflammation is a local reaction. It heats up the area and basically makes it harder for foreign bodies to hurt you. Okay, so that is inflammation. And this is just a quick diagram of how this happens. The essence of it is that when you are punctured or something along those lines, there will be inflammation develop as your body's means of trying to protect you. This will bring in macrophages. It will prevent the spread of potential pathogens. It works like a charm. And that takes us to the third line of defense, which we call specific immunity. So we will pick that up in just a moment. I've got to change the battery in this camera, and then we will do the third line of defense. Alright, and we're back. Sorry, my battery on the camera began to die, folks, so I just went ahead and cut it off and went and charged it up. So let's see if by some act we can get this particular part of the lecture done. Alright, so we went through and talked about surface barriers like your skin, your mucous membranes, as being excellent at keeping out potentially dangerous things. Once things come in, the kids are having a great time. Once things come in, we have our internal defenses like our general macrophages and other potentially phagocytic cells that will help to defend us against all pathogens. These attack all pathogens. They are non-specific. They will go out and do whatever they have to do, but they're slow at it, and you're going to get sick. Then there's the third line of defense. The third line of defense is you're going to get sick the first time, but then you're never going to get sick again, because these will realize what's happening. B cells and T cells will realize what's happening. They will learn the nuances of whatever it is that's causing you to be ill, and then they'll develop memory. So if you're ever affected by that ever again, they will take care of it without you ever being aware of it. Alright, so the third line of defense, this is adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity. Indeed. Alright. So, let's see. What do we want to say here? For this to work, there has to be a first step. And the first step is that your body, your adaptive immune system, must come into contact with whatever foreign substance it is prior to having the capacity to protect your body. Your immune system starts out what we call naive. And then when it's exposed to specific pathogens, it will learn them and be capable of defending you without your conscious knowledge. When we say coming into contact with foreign substances, what we're really talking about are antigens. Antigens, are we listening? Antigens are exterior cellular markers on cells. Exterior cellular markers, like type A blood, type B blood, those are antigens, okay? Antigens are exterior cellular markers. And what will happen here is your adaptive immunity will pick up these antigens, and they will be able to read cells and tell what type of cell that is. Is it your cell, or is it some other type of, like a bacterium or something like that, that's potentially dangerous? Two things separate this out from other forms of immunity. One is it is specific. Specificity indicates that you'll have very specific cells that only attack E. coli. You have very specific cells that only deal with chickenpox virus. It's very specific. And there is memory. The idea is you're exposed, your system is no longer naive, so the second time you're exposed, when you are re-exposed, the pathogen will have no time to really hurt you. Your immune system will activate so quickly that it will defend you at great speed. Alright, cells of adaptive immunity are T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes primarily. Now, both of these is very important. Both of these arise from the bone marrow. They both come from the bone marrow. The difference is that B lymphocytes mature in the bone marrow and then go and hang out in a lymph node. T lymphocytes leave the bone marrow when they're quite young. They enter the thymus gland and they are locked away. I need to make sure about something. Yeah, I don't see it. Let me just explain. So the T lymphocytes, they are T lymphocytes because thymus, okay? They get locked away in the thymus gland. The thymus gland is like it has a blood barrier system to keep T lymphocytes from escaping. Like you probably have heard of autoimmune diseases at this stage. An autoimmune disease is where your T lymphocytes freak out and destroy some of your own tissues. Those are supposed to be held in the thymus until, this is very important, they are held in the thymus until they develop what's called immunocompetence and self-tolerance. Immunocompetence means they have the ability to detect surface antigens. They can recognize one versus another, and they're self-tolerant. That means that they are they can recognize your cells and not destroy them. They tolerate self. They destroy non-self. So once these cells in the thymus, the T cells in the thymus, have developed immunocompetence and self-tolerance, they are freed and they go out to the bloodstream where they kind of flow in and out of lymph nodes looking for potential problems. Yes, perfect. Humoral, okay, so B cells versus T cells. All right, they vary. What this is saying is they vary in the way that they attack potential pathogens. All right. B cells are kind of cool because they don't really attack and destroy anything. What B cells do is they mark cells for destruction. Okay, these are going to be making what are called antibodies. B cells are going to make antibodies, and they have other roles too. And those antibodies mark cells for death so that other white blood cells can go and destroy them. Like T cells directly attack and destroy foreign cells. Now, here is an important point to be made. B cells only work on what are called extracellular stages of infectious microorganisms. Fancy way to say, if you got a bacteria floating around your bloodstream, it's hanging out like in its own place, it's not in one of your cells, it's just hanging out around your cells, then your B cells can attack and destroy it. But if it gets in one of your cells, or if one of your cells gets a virus inside of it, B cells can do nothing about this. That's the realm of T cells. T cells deal with toxified cells that belong to you. These are very competent at doing this job. They can pick up minor nuances of the external surface of the cell, realize it's diseased, and cause it to be destroyed. Perfect. So how does it work? Now, boy, let me tell you, it's hard to pick if you start here or if you start there. So I start here, and then we'll probably bounce back and forth a few times just to make sure we're on the same page. Okay, B cells do not destroy pathogens. What B cells do is they mark cells for death. They mark cells for death by releasing what are called antibodies. So imagine I am a pathogenic cell. I have pathogenic antigens on my exterior surface. It is clear that I'm a bad guy. B cells will release antibodies that put targets on every bad antigen they find. So it'll put a big old target on me, and then other white blood cells are able to see the target and know that's one to be destroyed and go knock it out. Okay? So how does it work? Pay attention. We have B lymphocytes. They will bind to a foreign antigen. Now, this is important. Your body is naive. It has to learn about this foreign pathogen. So it will bind to that foreign antigen and learn what that antigen looks like. It will become activated by a special cell, and then it'll go boom and differentiate into plasma cells and memory cells. So B cells become educated, they are activated, and then they differentiate into lots of plasma cells and a few memory cells. So what does this do? Well, the plasma cells make antibodies, like 2,000 a second. Your bloodstream becomes completely flush, completely washed in antibodies from these plasma cells. So that any foreign antigens that are in your body that pertain to this, man, they're all going to get marked and they're going to get killed fast. Like they're destroyed almost immediately. The memory cells will stay around for years and years and years and years and years. The plasma cells all die off basically when the crisis is averted. So why do the memory cells remain? The memory cells live for years, and if you're ever re-exposed to that same pathogen, the memory cells immediately become plasma cells and start cranking out antibodies, shortchanging all the rest of this. So basically, I get sick, and my immune system learns that pathogen, so now I'm beginning to get better, now I'm better and I'm okay. If I'm ever re-exposed to that pathogen, my memory cells become plasma cells and make antibodies immediately. I never even notice. I never even notice that I was exposed to a potential disorder. Yeah, that's perfect. Second exposure is much faster. Antibodies mark pathogens for death. Yeah, I like it. Alright, and then there are T cells. So T cells are made in the bone marrow. They go and they hang out in the thymus where they develop into either cytotoxic Ts or helper Ts. Cytotoxic Ts, let me make sure I'm not skipping anything. Direct attack. Yeah, we've already talked about that. Cytotoxic Ts, let me explain what they do. They can sense, this is fancy, what's called a cell's major histocompatibility complex protein network. Okay? They can sense the major histocompatibility complex, and basically by feeling of all of these cellular markers on the outside of that cell, this is the major histocompatibility complex. We'll just call it the MHC for short. From now on, we're just going to say MHC. They sense the MHCs, which is basically a super fancy network of antigens. And they say, okay, that's one of mine, we're good. Okay, that's one of my cells, we're okay. So then they cruise along, and they sense another cell, and they're feeling of it, and they're like, okay, this is one of mine, but there's something wrong inside of there. Something's happening. Maybe there's a virus. So it destroys the cell. Then they're cruising along, cytotoxic T's cruising along, it fills the cell. It's like, oh, well that's not one of mine at all, that's a bacteria, so it destroys it. Cytotoxic T cells can sense minor variations in cellular surfaces and identify self versus non-self, as well as detecting pathogens inside of a host cell. Those are pretty impressive. These are the ones that can lead to autoimmune disorders if they malfunction. And then there are helper T cells. What helper T cells do is they activate other T... You hear my kids? Oh my gosh. They're having a great time out there. What helper T cells do is they activate other T cells, or they activate B cells of humoral immunity. This is a helper T. The helper T activates this B lymphocyte that's bound to an antigen to become a plasma cell. HIV and AIDS. HIV, AIDS, what these do, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. What this does is it causes helper Ts to no longer function. So if you shut down the helper T cells, that means you shut down humoral immunity. And if you shut down humoral immunity, that puts your immune system at a really terrible disadvantage. So people with AIDS don't die from AIDS. They die from a cold. They die from some minor infection because they can't use this aspect of their immune system to defend themselves. All right, it's terrible. Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Yeah. All right. Oh, and this makes memory T cells as well, so they are capable of sticking around for a prolonged period of time. And all that to say, there is this chart. Man, let me tell you, sometimes you just stumble upon the right stuff, and this is the right stuff, guys. A B cell finds an antigen that it doesn't like. Here's a bad guy. So it waits, holding on to that thing until it's activated by a helper T. Once it becomes a helper, once the helper T activates it, it differentiates. This B cell differentiates into plasma cells and memory cells. The plasma cell starts cranking out antibodies that mark cells for death. And then big honking macrophages can come around and find the marked cells and destroy them. Memory cells stick around just in case you're ever re-exposed. And if you are, they go straight to here and shortchange all the rest of this. Okay? So that is how specific immunity works. The idea is you have to be exposed, you have to learn what it is, and then you're capable of defending yourself at great speed. And you can see this. So what you see is antibody count, I believe. Yeah, plasma antibody concentrations. You're exposed to some sort of disease via a vaccine in this case, and you'll see your antibody count kind of go up and come back down. But if you're ever exposed again, you'll just start cranking out antibodies incredibly fast and at an incredibly high rate. This is why we do vaccines. What we do with vaccines is we expose our bodies to pathogens. Our bodies will respond to those pathogens, and what that means is you're never going to actually get sick from it. You'll be capable of defending yourself. So if I don't want to get the measles, which is a terrible disorder, I will go and get an MMR vaccine. This exposes me to the measles. Now, it's not an active version of the measles, so I'm not going to get sick, but my immune system is going to learn that that's a bad thing. And then it's going to develop memory cells, which will defend me if I'm ever exposed to the real active pathogen. Yeah, this is called titer. If you've ever heard the phrase antibody titer, we're looking at the amount of antibody present in the bloodstream at any given period of time. This is why we occasionally have to get what are called booster shots. We get booster shots to boost our antibody titer. Yeah. I think we're near the end. Yeah, we're near the end. Alright, so immunity, parting comments. Immunity is the ability to combat diseases and cancers. It can be brought about naturally through an infection or artificially through medical intervention. There are two types of immunity. These are active immunity and passive immunity, both of which can either be acquired naturally or through artificial processes. Let me check my time here. Alright, let me describe what's happening. Naturally acquired, this is you are out in the world around you and you catch something. You catch something. Wait, hang tight. Yeah, that's... let's do this in a slightly different way. Naturally acquired active immunity is you're out in the world and you catch a cold. Okay, you're gonna get that virus in that particular case. Your immune system will adapt to it, and you shouldn't ever get sick from that virus again. That's naturally acquired active immunity. The infection, you get contacted with it, and you're going to develop memory cells against this, and you should be fine from then on out. There is also naturally acquired what's called passive immunity. When we say it's passive immunity, that means that you're only defended for a short period of time, a matter of days to weeks, sometimes months. When we think of naturally acquired passive immunity, the first thing that comes to my mind is the antibodies that are passed from mom to baby via the placenta. So when a baby's born, the baby has pretty much mom's immune system for a few weeks. It primes the kid, so if the kid's exposed to a terrible pathogen early on, the kid should be fine because mom's immune system is basically active in that baby for a period of time. And if mom breastfeeds, she can extend that for a prolonged period because breast milk contains antibodies that can then be absorbed into the system and used by that baby. Okay, they make their way in. So breastfeeding is very important from my perspective because it applies this concept of naturally acquired passive immunity for the duration of breastfeeding, for however long that goes. And then there's artificially acquired immunity. So artificially acquired active immunity is you go get a vaccine. You're going to go and get vaccinated against measles, mumps, rubella, smallpox for back in the day, you name it. You're getting a shot. My kids, man, they're having a great time. You go and you get a shot, and that's going to give you active immunity. You're going to be immune to whatever that is for the rest of your days in all likelihood. You're going to be just fine for a prolonged period. Artificially acquired passive immunity is when you get an injection of antibodies. This is how we did Ebola a while back. So we had a guy that came back to the United States. He had been sick with Ebola, and his immune system just tore Ebola to pieces. So what we did is we extracted serum from him. We started manufacturing antibodies from his blood serum, and then anybody else that came in that had Ebola, they'd just inject them with his antibodies, and they would get some degree of passive immunity for a period of time. I think we did hemolytic disease of the newborn and talked about RhoGAM injections to prevent mom's immune system from responding to rhesus positive blood. That's passive immunity as well. So she's going to have an injection of antibodies that are going to destroy those rhesus positive blood cells, and she's not going to have any sort of active response that could cause problems for future pregnancies. Yes, perfect. All right, how can the immune system harm the body? So there are a few ways that this can happen. Let me check my time. I'm going to restart. Perfect. All right, how can the immune system harm the body? So allergies, tissue rejection, and immune system disorders. Allergies and allergens. An allergy is a hypersensitivity to something harmless. Potatoes, peanuts, whatever. Peanuts can't hurt you. So there's no reason for a scratch from a peanut to cause somebody to go into anaphylactic shock. This is a harmless substance that the body, for whatever reason, becomes hypersensitive to. Pollen, food, animal hair, what have you. Breathing in pollen from a plant should not hurt you. It should have no effect. But some of us have major problems as a result of this. That's an allergy. An allergy. What will happen is these allergens present antigens that cause a reaction. Now, this kind of goes into two formats. There are what we call immediate allergic responses and delayed allergic responses. An immediate allergic response is going to be where there's an allergen and... my kids. Our body releases antibodies to respond to this. They typically release something like histamine, and it will cause a crazy reaction to take place that is sort of meaningless in the grand scheme. I'll give you an example. My wife doesn't do well with cats. We went to a friend of ours' house, and we're just hanging out. She goes, man, my eyes are so like nasty and watery and swelling. Like, it's awful. And they were like, oh, well, we have a cat. And she goes, oh my God, I'm allergic to cats. She had no idea. But just in the air, the dander in the air caused her to release histamine, which made her eyes get all watery and gross. Breathing in pollen causes all your upper respiratory tract to freak out and release histamine. And what histamine does is it causes local inflammation that causes the production of piles of mucus, and your nasal passages get all gross and swollen. It's just not a fun experience. Runny nose, itchy skin, watery eyes, asthma, even at the extremes, cramping. Things can get worse and worse. So food allergies, for instance, causing diarrhea and vomiting. And then there's anaphylactic shock. So when we think about anaphylactic shock, what we tend to think of is having some sort of allergen immediately injected into the bloodstream. Think like a bee sting. Somebody goes and they get stung by a bee and they have an allergic reaction. It can kill them very quickly. Your blood pressure drops like a rock. Sometimes people's lungs swell up and they have, in essence, an asthma attack. The tongue can swell to the point that it blocks off the airflow. I mean, you name it. Even, again, circulatory shutdown. People can die from this. Just like a honeybee. Honeybee sting can't hurt you. Like, it's going to hurt a little. I mean, you know, it's not bad. Like, trust me, stepping on a Lego is about as bad as getting bit by a honeybee. But some people will die from this because of anaphylactic shock. And then there are, of course, delayed allergic reactions. You are walking through the woods one day, and the next day you wake up, you got a rash on your legs. Well, you probably got poison ivy or something along those lines. That's where the body picks up that that's there, but the response is slow. It's a variation of how this works, so B cells versus T cells. It's a delayed allergic response. All right, then there are transplantations. So in the realm of transplantations, there's a lot that can be happening here. I'm just going to run through this with you. Autografts, isografts, allografts, and xenografts. Autografts is where we take tissue from you and put it somewhere else in you. So if you're having a open heart surgery, they can take a vein from somewhere else in your body and pipe it in and use it to clear a blockage in an artery on your heart. Okay, it's your vein, so your body's not going to have any immune response or try to reject it. It's yours. It's an autograft. There are isografts. This is a graft from a genetically identical person. So if you had a pair of twins that were genetically identical to one another, if one of them had complete kidney failure, you could yank a kidney out of the other and pipe that sucker in, and they're going to have no problems because their genes are identical. They're going to have the same basic immune system and not have any chance of rejection. Far more often what we see are allografts. Allografts are where we have people that are not genetically identical, but they're close, and we try to transplant one thing to another. So somebody has a major heart problem, and they have a heart transplant from someone else. They will try to get someone very similar for that heart transplant, but they're not going to be the same. So there's a possibility of tissue rejection because the MHCs are different. That major histocompatibility complex, you can match almost all of it, but any minor nuance to the MHC between two people, and there's a chance of rejection. So what we'll try to do is, when someone has an allograft, like a heart transplant or a lung transplant, whatever, what we'll do is we'll give them the transplant, and we will treat them with immunodepressant drugs to make their immune system not as functional, so that there's a better chance that the immune system won't destroy that organ. And that happens a lot, actually. And then there are xenografts. Xenografts is when we take a transplant from another animal and put that into a human system. The most common I hear about are pig valves. So somebody has a heart valve issue, they'll go in and pull a pig heart valve out, pipe that sucker into a person, and they're off to the races. We're working on all kinds of things with xenografts. This is actually a human arm with fish skin that was used to cover the area of damage from a burn, so that the burn could slowly heal back, and it worked like a charm. So slowly the skin got underneath the transplanted fish skin, and the fish skin just slowly sloughed off. That is a real thing. That actually happened. I think that's in Korea. I could be mistaken. And then, of course, there is tissue rejection. Let me just check something. Okay. Tissue rejection, this is where your cytotoxic T cells and other things like your macrophages sense that a tissue is not yours and they attack and destroy it. This can be sort of slowed down by immunosuppressant drugs, but the risk of rejection is incredibly high. So very, very high risk of rejection. And plus, taking these immunosuppressant drugs holds down the immune system, so minor infections can be very, very dangerous. Like this virus that's going around right now would be devastating to someone that's having to take drugs that suppress their immune system for a transplant. Okay, that'll work. And let's go here. So, disorders of the immune system. 2, I will mention autoimmune diseases. This is where your cytotoxic T cells or what have you will attack and destroy your own body cells as if they were foreign. Good examples of this, multiple sclerosis, lupus, myasthenia gravis, or MG, and more importantly from my perspective is rheumatoid arthritis. So rheumatoid arthritis, what happens is your cytotoxic Ts go in and destroy your synovial membranes. So if your synovial membranes break down, your joints don't articulate correctly any longer, and you end up with rheumatoid arthritis. And then there are immunodeficiency diseases, of which there are a couple. AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, and SID, which is severe combined immunodeficiency syndrome. Both of these do basically the same thing. This is where the immune system is compromised and unable to defend the body against disease. This severe combined immunodeficiency is what they would refer to as a bubble boy situation, where any infection can cause major, major problems for a person. We think we might be able to get around this later in life by using bone marrow transplants to transplant in functioning bone marrow that makes functioning white blood cells, but to my knowledge that's never been attempted. And next is the respiratory system, and that, folks, will be a different lecture. Alright, so be expecting this one relatively soon. Thanks.